The night of the coronation was cold and clear, and the whole of Hallamere Pack had gathered beneath the ancient oaks to see their new king choose his fated mate. Silver lanterns hung from the branches, and the moon hung fat and bright above them, as if she too had come to watch. Elira Voss stood at the very back of the crowd, half hidden behind a pillar of old stone. She was 23 years old, plain in the way people used that word when they meant forgettable, and she had long ago learned to make herself small in rooms where her sister stood. Seraphine was near the front, glowing in a gown of pale gold, her hair falling in perfect waves, her smile already practiced for the moment everyone expected. Since they were children, it had always been understood that if the moon goddess were ever going to bless anyone in their family, it would be Seraphine. She was beautiful, clever with words, and adored by nearly everyone who met her. Elira had grown used to being the shadow beside that light, and she had stopped minding it, or told herself she had. Alpha King Draven Ashcroft stood at the center of the grove, tall and solemn in his ceremonial coat, his dark eyes scanning the crowd without real hope. He was said to be a fair ruler, careful and quiet, the kind of man who thought before he spoke. Rumor said he had waited years for this ceremony, hoping the goddess would finally mark someone for him, tired of the loneliness that came with leading a pack, but belonging to no one. The pack elder lifted her arms and began the old chant, calling on the moon goddess to reveal the mate bond if one existed among them. The air grew thick, charged with something ancient and unseen. Elira felt a strange warmth spread up her arm, but she told herself it was nothing, just the cold night playing tricks on her skin. Then the mark appeared. A thin crescent of silver light bloomed across her wrist, glowing bright enough that gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire. It was not Seraphine who had been marked. It was Elira. For one heartbeat, the entire grove went silent. Draven's breath caught in his chest as the bond hit him, a pull so strong it nearly knocked him from his feet, a warmth and recognition that told him, without any doubt, that the woman standing near the stone pillar was his. He took a step toward her. That was when Seraphine cried out and collapsed. She fell gracefully, her hand pressed to her forehead, murmuring that she had always known, that she had felt something all evening, that surely the light had simply caught her sister's arm at a strange angle. Their mother rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside Seraphine, declaring loudly that there had clearly been some mistake, that the goddess could not possibly have chosen quiet, unremarkable Elira over her radiant sister. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. Doubt spread through the crowd like smoke. Draven looked from Seraphine's tears to Elira's stunned, silent face, and in that single terrible moment, hesitation crept into him. This was more than a personal matter. It was a matter of pack alliance, of politics, of families who had been tied together for generations through the Voss line. If he crossed the grove and claimed the quiet sister over the celebrated one, it might tear apart the fragile peace his father had spent his whole life building. So Draven did the one thing he would spend the rest of his life regretting. He said nothing certain. He allowed the elders to declare the mark unclear, an error of the ceremony's light. And by the end of that night, under pressure from the Voss family and the watching pack, he accepted Seraphine as his mate instead. Elira said nothing. She had never been given the chance to speak, and by now she understood that speaking rarely changed anything in her family. She simply turned, walked past the whispering crowd, and disappeared into the dark line of trees at the edge of the grove. She did not cry until she reached the old sacred grove, deep in the forest where the pack rarely went, a place said to be closer to the goddess than anywhere else in their territory. There, beneath a canopy of silver leaves, she finally let herself feel the full weight of what had happened, not just tonight, but every year before it. Every time she had been passed over, every time her feelings had been treated as inconvenient, every time she had swallowed her own voice so the peace around her could remain undisturbed. She knelt in the moonlight, tears sliding down her face, and instead of asking the goddess for love, she asked for something else entirely. She asked to be free. "I do not want a bond that was never truly wanted," she whispered. "I do not want to spend my life as someone's second choice, tolerated instead of chosen. If this mark was ever meant for me, please, let me let it go." The forest went still. The wind stopped, And then the crescent mark on her wrist began to glow, brighter and brighter, until the light became almost unbearable, and then, in an instant, it vanished completely, leaving her skin bare and unmarked, as if the goddess had never touched her at all. Miles away, in the stone halls of the pack house, Draven gasped and staggered against a wall, his hand flying to his chest. Something inside him had been severed, a cord he had not even realized was holding him together until it snapped. The warmth of the bond, the quiet hum of recognition he had felt since the ceremony, disappeared entirely. He felt hollow in a way he had never felt before, as though a room inside him that had just been lit for the first time had gone suddenly, permanently dark. He did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat awake, turning the moment over and over in his mind. The mark on Alira's wrist, Seraphine's collapse, his own hesitation. And now, this strange and terrible emptiness that told him something sacred had been lost, and lost because of choices he had made. By morning, word had already begun to spread through the pack. No one, not even the oldest elders, could remember a single case in the pack's long history where the moon goddess had erased a bond entirely. Marks had faded before, when mates were lost to death or tragedy, but never like this. Never in a single night. Never right after the bond had first been formed. The pack whispered that it was a sign, an omen, a judgment. Some said the goddess was angry. Others said she was simply honoring the wishes of the woman she had chosen. Draven could not ignore the truth any longer. He began to ask questions no one wanted to answer. He spoke with the healers who had attended Seraphine after her collapse, and learned there had been nothing wrong with her at all. No dizziness, no weakness, nothing that would explain a sudden fall. He spoke with members of the household staff, who admitted quietly, nervously, that Seraphine had been overheard rehearsing her reaction earlier that same day, practicing exactly how she would fall and exactly what she would say. He confronted his own advisors about the pressure that had been placed on the elders that night, and learned that the Voss matriarch had spent weeks before the ceremony quietly reminding pack officials of old debts and old favors, ensuring that if anyone but Seraphine were marked, the outcome would still somehow favor her family. Finally, unable to bear the guilt any longer, he sought out Seraphine directly, and in her own chambers, he found her journal left carelessly open on her desk. In her own handwriting, dated the very morning of the ceremony, she had written that she was afraid the mark might not choose her, that her sister had always been the quiet one, but never the plain one in truth, and that if the goddess chose wrong, she would simply have to make sure the pack never knew it. Draven closed the journal slowly, his hands trembling, not with anger alone, but with a grief that had nowhere to go. He had trusted the wrong sister. He had doubted the truth the moment it stood in front of him. And now the very thing he had tried to protect, the peace of his pack, the strength of his alliances, felt like ash in his hands, compared to what he had actually lost. He called for a gathering of the full pack council. In front of every elder, every family, every watching eye, he laid out everything he had learned. He spoke of the staged collapse, the pressure placed on the elders, the private admission written in Seraphine's own hand. The grove that had once been filled with celebration, now filled with a heavy, uncomfortable silence, as the truth settled over the pack like frost. Seraphine tried to deny it at first, her voice rising in practiced distress, but when her mother could not meet Draven's eyes, and when the healers confirmed there had never been any real fainting spell, the truth became impossible to hide. The pack that had once adored Seraphine now looked at her with quiet, cold understanding. Draven ended the mating claim that day, formally and publicly, releasing Seraphine from any bond of leadership or title within the pack. It was a mercy, in its own way, though she did not see it that way at the time. Her mother's influence among the elders crumbled along with the scandal, and the family that had once stood so close to the throne found itself quietly, permanently, at its edges instead. Through all of this, Alira had stayed away from the pack house, living instead in a small cabin near the edge of the territory, tending to herbs and healing work the way her grandmother once had. She had heard, of course, what was happening, carried to her in pieces by neighbors and travelers, but she had not gone to see it for herself. She was not interested in watching her sisters fall, and she was not interested in being pulled back into a story she had already chosen to leave behind. It was Draven who came to her. He arrived at dusk, without guards, without ceremony, dressed simply, looking more tired than she had ever seen him. He stood at the edge of her small garden and asked, quietly, if he could speak with her. She let him in, more out of old habit than any real desire to hear what he had to say, and she listened as he told her everything: the journal, the healers, the council, the ache that had lived in his chest since the night the bond disappeared, an emptiness he had never been able to explain to anyone but knew, somehow, belonged to her. He asked, finally, the question that had brought him there: could the bond be restored? Could the goddess give back what had been taken, now that the truth was known, now that he understood what he had lost? Elira was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the darkening trees rather than at him. "The goddess does not return what a person freely gives away," she said at last. "I did not lose the bond that night. I let it go. Not because I did not feel it, because I did feel it, more strongly than I have ever felt anything in my life. I let it go because a bond built on being someone's second choice was never truly a gift to begin with. I did not want to spend my whole life wondering if I would have been chosen at all, if the goddess had not marked me first." Draven had no answer for that, because he knew, in his heart, that she was right. He had hesitated when it mattered most, and some choices, once made, could not simply be undone by wishing they had gone differently. He did not beg her to change her mind. He simply nodded, accepting the weight of what his hesitation had cost him, and thanked her, quietly, for finally telling him the truth she had never been given the chance to speak that night in the grove. In the seasons that followed, Elira remained near the edge of the territory, but no longer in her family's shadow. She became known throughout the pack, not as the sister who had been overlooked, or the woman whose mark had vanished in a single night, but simply as herself, a skilled healer whose calm presence people came to trust and rely on. For the first time in her life, she was seen clearly, not compared to anyone, not measured against anyone else's light. Draven ruled on alone, a fair king in the eyes of his pack, respected and steady in all the ways that mattered to those he led. But those closest to him noticed that some nights, when the moon rose full and bright over Halomir, he would stand at his window for a long while in silence, one hand resting absently over his chest, as though listening for an echo of something that was no longer there. He never spoke of it, and no one asked. But everyone who knew him understood, without needing the words, that some bonds, once broken by hesitation, do not return simply because the truth finally arrives. The moon goddess had given him a chance beneath the silver light of that grove, and for one fatal moment, he had let doubt speak louder than certainty. It was a lesson the whole pack would remember for generations, whispered sometimes to young wolves before their own coming ceremonies, a quiet reminder that when the goddess marks a heart, hesitation can cost far more than anyone ever expects to pay.